These are the classic Hollywood films that dared to make audiences laugh at dictators, nuclear war, serial murder, and death itself. Nearly every single one ended up banned, boycotted, censored, or declared a flop before history proved the filmmakers right. The story of the black comedy in old Hollywood is really about directors who had more faith in audiences than censors ever did. And it begins with what might be the bravest comedy ever committed to film. 6 days after the outbreak of World War II, Charlie Chaplin began production on The Great Dictator. America was still officially neutral, and nobody in Hollywood wanted to touch anti-fascist material. But Chaplin sank $1.5 million of his own money into a satire of Adolf Hitler. President Franklin Roosevelt quietly encouraged him to do it, with Jack Warner relaying Roosevelt's support after a meeting in the Oval Office. Every Nazi-occupied country banned the film, and several Latin American nations followed under Axis diplomatic pressure. None of that stopped American audiences from making it the second most popular movie of the year. 9 million people in the UK went to see it. And in one incident that almost sounds made up, a resistance group in the occupied Balkans smuggled a print from Greece and swapped reels at a military cinema. German soldiers reportedly sat enjoying the screening until they figured out what they were actually watching. Chaplin would later write in his autobiography, "Had I known of the actual horrors of the German concentration camps, I could not have made The Great Dictator. I could not have made fun of the homicidal insanity of the Nazis." Ernst Lubitsch pushed the line even further 2 years later with To Be or Not to Be, a screwball comedy set in Nazi-occupied Warsaw. Production started in November 1941 and wrapped on Christmas Eve, which meant Pearl Harbor landed right in the middle of the shoot. What makes the film even more haunting is that this was Carole Lombard's final picture. She died in a plane crash on January 16th, 1942, during a war bonds tour just weeks before the premiere. That kind of timing made critics deeply uncomfortable with the comedy. Bosley Crowther at the New York Times wrote that it was hard to imagine how anyone can take, without batting an eye, a shattering air raid upon Warsaw right after a sequence of farce. The Philadelphia Inquirer called it a callous, tasteless effort to find fun in the bombing of Warsaw. Lubitsch had a simple answer for all of them. "What I have satirized in this picture," he told the press, "are the Nazis and their ridiculous ideology." Today, the film holds a 96% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Across the Atlantic, British filmmakers at Ealing Studios were building an entire tradition around exactly this kind of humor. Kind Hearts and Coronets arrived in 1949, with Alec Guinness playing 8 members of the same aristocratic family, all of whom get systematically murdered by a distant relative climbing the line of succession. Guinness had originally been offered just 4 roles. His response, after reading the script on a beach in France, was a telegram that read, "Why 4 parts? Why not 8? American censors found the whole thing so unsettling that the US release required an altered ending, one that assured audiences the killer would face justice. The British original left that question completely open. The Spectator would later call it the most confident comedy ever to come out of a British studio. Ealing struck again in 1955 with The Ladykillers, directed by Alexander McKendrick, a film about a gang of criminals who are ultimately undone by a sweet old lady. Screenwriter William Rose claimed he dreamt the entire plot and simply had to remember it when he woke up. Katie Johnson, who played the old lady, won the BAFTA for Best British Actress at the age of 77, and the film still holds a perfect 100% on Rotten Tomatoes from 35 reviews. The BFI ranked it the 13th greatest British film of all time. That same year brought Alfred Hitchcock's only pure black comedy, The Trouble with Harry, about a dead body in the Vermont countryside that keeps getting buried and dug up. Hitchcock called it one of his personal favorites and picked up the rights to the source novel anonymously for just $11,000. It also marked the beginning of his collaboration with composer Bernard Herrmann, and Hitchcock later said the score was his favorite of all his films. American audiences, though, did not get it at all. The Trouble with Harry became the only one of Hitchcock's Paramount films that failed to turn a domestic profit on initial release. Audiences in England and France loved it. Actor John Forsythe explained the gap perfectly when he said, "Digging up a dead body and pulling it around, taking it different places, is not considered funny, except by the British and some of the Europeans. But in the United States, death is not considered funny." What changed everything was Hitchcock's television series, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which premiered in October 1955 and whose tone was directly modelled on The Trouble with Harry. When the film got a re-release in 1963, American audiences were far more receptive. By the late 1950s, Billy Wilder stopped tiptoeing around the censors entirely. Some Like It Hot came out in 1959 without the Motion Picture Production Code's seal of approval, a move that amounted to raising a middle finger at the entire system. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it as seriously offensive to Christian and traditional standards of morality and decency, specifically citing clear inferences of homosexuality and lesbianism. Kansas banned it outright. Audiences packed theaters anyway and turned it into one of the biggest hits of the year. $14 million in US grosses by 1962, and the overwhelming success of the film is widely considered one of the key reasons the production code finally collapsed. The film's famous closing line, "Well, nobody's perfect," was never supposed to stay in the final cut. Wilder and co-writer I.A.L. Diamond wrote it as a placeholder until they could think of something better, and they never did. Wilder loved the line so much that his actual tombstone reads, "I'm a writer, but then nobody's perfect." Stanley Kubrick took things to the absolute extreme with Dr. Strangelove. The project started as a serious drama after Kubrick acquired the rights to Peter George's 1958 novel, Red Alert. But during development, the real-world logic of nuclear deterrence struck him as so absurd that only comedy could do it justice. He brought in satirist Terry Southern to help write the screenplay, and the result, on a budget of just $1.8 million, earned 4 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Peter Sellers played 3 different roles after Columbia Pictures insisted he appear in at least 4, believing his multiple performances in Lolita had driven European ticket sales. Sellers refused the 4th role, Major Kong, which went to Slim Pickens. A 2002 director's poll in Sight and Sound rated Dr. Strangelove the 5th greatest film of all time, making it the only comedy in the top 10. The original Hollywood Reporter review from 1964 put it best when it said, "Kubrick appreciates that a serious point may be far more devastatingly made with humor than earnestness." Not every black comedy found its audience in time to save its maker. Chaplin's Monsieur Verdoux, a dark comedy about a serial killer who murders wealthy widows, grew from an idea Chaplin bought from Orson Welles for $5,000. The premiere at the Broadway Theatre in New York on April 11th, 1947, turned into a disaster. The audience booed. Cinemas showing the film were picketed by members of the Catholic War veterans carrying placards that called for Chaplin's deportation. Memphis banned it outright. At a press conference where journalists refused to discuss the film and instead grilled him about his political sympathies and his refusal to adopt American citizenship, Chaplin opened with 2 words: "Proceed with the butchering." For the first time in over 20 years, a Chaplin film lost money. That backlash helped drive him out of the country. His re-entry papers were revoked in 1952, and he would not return to America for 20 years. And then there is Harold and Maude. Hal Ashby's 1971 black comedy about a death-obsessed 20-year-old who falls in love with a free-spirited 79-year-old was written by Colin Higgins, who came up with the story while working as a pool cleaner, telling it to a producer's daughter while driving her to school. The whole thing started as his master's thesis at UCLA Film School. Paramount released it on December 20th, 1971, a date that had originally been held for The Godfather, which wasn't finished yet, and the studio slotted Harold and Maude into the gap with almost no marketing. Variety reported a dismal $8,500 for the Village debut. Roger Ebert gave it 1.5 stars. Variety itself described it as having all the fun and gaiety of a burning orphanage. Producer Charles Mulvihill summed up the problem bluntly when he said, "You couldn't drag people in. The idea of a 20-year-old boy with an 80-year-old woman just made people want to vomit." And that's when the strangest thing happened. The film slowly caught on in repertory theaters and on college campuses. In Minneapolis, it ran continuously for 3 years, so long that residents actually picketed the theater, trying to get management to replace the picture. A theater in Essen, Germany has been showing it continuously since June 6, 1975. One moviegoer in 1974 made the news for claiming to have seen it 138 times. Ruth Gordon's last public appearance was at a benefit screening of Harold and Maude in 1985, 2 weeks before she died. The Library of Congress selected it for the National Film Registry in 1997. That is really the thread running through all of these films. Chaplin, Lubitsch, Hitchcock, Wilder, Kubrick, and Ashby all placed the same bet. They trusted that audiences could handle laughing at things that weren't supposed to be funny. The censors, the critics, and the picketers told them they were wrong. But the audiences who showed up, sometimes years later, sometimes decades later, proved them right every time.